experience. Custom cases available only through Falcon Northwest feature state-of-the-art testing and design to ensure that every component is performing at their best through thermal imaging and rigorous lab testing designed and overseen by the Falcon Northwest founder himself. With a complete lineup of systems ranging from small to large, every Falcon Northwest system includes a 3-year warranty policy and a year of 2-way overnight shipping coverage, providing the ultimate peace of mind. To see all that Falcon Northwest has to offer, follow the sponsored link in the description below. So ironically, Asus of all people is the one that came through, was able to actually get me a 5060 card to do a review on, because this is the only MSRP model that exists. For now. All right, so here we go. About 10 days late to this review, ironically, this card came by way of Canada. I'm assuming that's to divert away from the extra costs. Anyway, let's talk about a few things here. Today I'm going to be comparing it specifically to the 4060, but you'll be seeing the entire chart like we do now. So you guys will see, basically this is the battle for the bottom, if you will. So, oh my God, if you thought 5060 Ti was terrible. Gotta say huge thanks to Asus for sending us the card, and also huge condolences for having to put your name on it. Can the previous gen, which is the same process, 8GB crap, compete with the latest bottom of the chart 8GB crap, if you will? Okay, look, I know we're being very, very salty, but let's face it, this card really is too little too late for 2025 and future gaming. We know 8GB cards are just simply not enough. And there's a reason why 5060 Ti reviews only came with 16GB variants, although there was an 8GB card. The 8GB card should never exist. Anyway, the 4060 is on the 8107 die. It's a 5nm process. It's got 18,900 million or 18.9 billion transistors, 1830 megahertz base clock, 2460 boost clock. It's got 8GB of GDDR6 running 128-bit for an effective bandwidth of 272 gigabytes per second bandwidth. When it comes to shader units, 3072 CUDA cores, 96 TMUs, 48 ROPs, 24 SMs, 96 tensor cores, 24 RT cores. Now when we compare it to the next gen, which is really just a half-gen step up, if you will. It's GB206. It's a Blackwell architecture, obviously. Still a 5nm process, but it's got 21,900 million or 21.9 billion transistors. It's got 8GB of GDDR7 at 128-bit at an effective 448 gigabytes per second. So it's pretty much twice the bandwidth, if you will, as GDDR6. So at least it's got that going for it. But anyway, moving on when it comes to the tensor cores and all that, it's got 3,840 shader units versus 3072, so quite a big jump in terms of CUDA cores, 120 TMUs, 48 ROPs, the same ROP count, 30 SMs versus 24, 120 tensor cores versus 96, 30 RT cores versus 24. So it's kind of like a little more of everything, with the exception of the memory bandwidth at that 8GB capacity, though, is terrible, nearly twice the speed. So when it comes to specs, really, like we've talked about with 50 series already, because it is essentially on the same process as 40 series was, it's kind of like a half step, if you will. Now, I kind of struggle with how to do this review and what perspective to take it from, mostly because I like to do the deep dive now, or the medium dive, if you will, like the snorkel dive of power draw and efficiency and frame times and comparing them gen over gen over gen. And it's really, I find a lot of people that are shopping at like the 60 series cards are not shopping there because they want to. I feel like a lot of the times they're shopping there because they have to. It's kind of what they can afford. And the 60 tier cards from NVIDIA are the entry level card. So if you're putting yourself in the position of the buyer that is like, I'm gonna buy new and I need to buy affordable, like that's what you're shoehorned into. You really, and especially with the way prices are today, you can't even consider buying or spending more money than that, because they start at $300. They have $299 MSRPs. We'll do some quick price checking in a second to see if any of them even land anywhere near that. Spoiler alert, they get pretty ridiculous. But when it comes to power draw and such, the 5060 is a 145 watt TDP card. It's actually pretty low. In fact, you only need a 300 watt power supply as a suggested PSU to run it. So I just kind of didn't do any of that power draw testing and such because it's so low. It's just not even really, it's a moot point, right? It really is a moot point. If you can, a 300 watt power supply is all that's recommended or suggested as a PSU for it, then even your most budget power supply you can buy today is gonna be able to handle this card. So it's not like when we talk about 80 and 90 series cards where they're such high power draw, you could run into a problem if your power supply isn't spec'd right, et cetera, et cetera. So moving on, let's go ahead and take a look at the charts. So when it came to the charts, I really was only interested in seeing what the generational uplift in terms of where they land on the chart. I didn't even do percentage figures with this, just to see how much better it is than the 4060. So it's got a little more of everything, and obviously it's got the newest generation of tensor cores and RT cores, which are going to give it a little bit of an edge, obviously, in those titles that are using DLSS and real-time ray tracing. So if we look at Speedway, which is an RT test, you can see we jump up from a 2650 with the 4060 up to a 3488 with the 5060 Prime. That's a fairly decent generational jump, but that's specifically more or less like testing the RT generation improvement, and don't forget we have more RT cores in that. But if we look at Time Spy Extreme, which is obviously a rasterization test, the 4060 Dual was literally the caboose. It's the lowest end card on our chart, it's the lowest scoring card on our chart, and we jump up from a 4926 up to a 6425. So if Time Spy Extreme, which is a synthetic benchmark, was kind of like the only benchmark we looked at, you could be like, hey, huge generational jump. But when it comes to games, it's not quite that cut and dry. So F1 4K, you can see we go from a 21.3 FPS up to a 28.9. So obviously we gained about 7.5 FPS, which is, I guess if you're down in the 20s, that's significant. But neither of these cards should be considering 4K. In fact, I'm not even gonna talk about 4K the rest of this review, with the exception of one title, and you guys might already know where we're going with that. But anyway, if we look at 1440p in F1, we go from a 47.4 to a 59.9, or essentially 60 FPS, so it's about a 12.5 FPS jump. That's noticeable at that particular frame rate. We get at least to that number that's where gamers are really trying to land, which is 60 FPS. But if we take a look at 1080p, then we jump from a 69.3 to an 80.2. So as you can see, we technically had a little bit less of an FPS jump when we went from 1080p, 4060 to 5060 versus 1440p. So if you look at Blackmyth Wukong 1440p, we jump from a 35.2 with the 4060 up to a 44.3. 1080p, we jump from a 51.2 to a 65.8. So a fairly good big jump when we talk about going from 4060 to 5060. And the 5060 is landing right in the middle, just under the halfway point on our chart. If we take a look at Borderlands 3, 1440p, again, the 4060 was the bottom card on our chart at 61.6, and we jump up to an 80.5. So it's actually a pretty good jump when we talk about Borderlands 1440. 1080p, from an 88.8 to a 115.7. So a pretty big jump when it comes to 1080p as well. If we take a look at Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, 1440p, we jump from a 43.7 to a 54 even. And in 1080p, we jump from a 65.4 to an 80.6. So you can see we're getting double-digit increases in performance, which is a nice to have, but they're kind of brute forcing it, right, by adding more of all the core types in there, CUDA cores, tensor cores, and RT cores. But you would expect that from a generational improvement. If we go ahead and look at Cyberpunk 2077 1440p, RT medium preset, which is still pretty damn hard for Cyberpunk, we go from a 24.3 in the 4060 up to a 34.4 for the 5060. So a 10 FPS jump when you're already only getting 24, that's a pretty significant jump. If we take a look at 1080p, we jump from a 42.5 to a 56.6. So again, at least we have a tangible improvement there. Let's talk about Stalker real quick. If we look at Stalker 1440p, we go from a 37.8 with the 4060 up to a 47.6. So again, another 10 FPS jump in 1440p. If we take a look at 1080p, we jump from a 52.9 to a 63.2. So once again, it's a good jump, but again, I would expect nothing more from having a new generation of everything, minus the core type technically. But once again, Stalker in 4K is that title that if you don't have at least 10 gigabytes or more, and to be even fair, the 3080 at 10 gigabytes has a hard time running this title in 4K. If you don't have at least 12 or higher, which is where we find a lot of the graphics cards that start to be able to really sort of push the title, you're not playing it. Now again, it's 4K. These cards are not intended for 4K. I would never ever dream of trying to play 4K titles with these particular graphics cards. But we were getting a whopping 2.2 FPS as our average. Our 5% lows was 1.7, even though you can't really see it, and our 1% lows are 0.6 FPS. In fact, it's so bad that there's about a 3.5 second delay between when you push a button and something happens on the game. It's, again, an outlier where it's not a realistic scenario, but the point is it's a scenario nonetheless where we can find where a card cannot do something. And my adage for upgrading is it's time to upgrade if what you have can't do what you want it to do as fast as you want it to do it. And I'm sorry, but 2.2 FPS in Stalker, 4K of course, is not fast enough. But if we look at the 7600 XT Pulse, which is again a very low-end graphics card from AMD's 7000 series lineup, it does an 18.7. Why? Because it has more VRAM. And the 7600 XT Pulse has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and that's really the only difference here. I mean, it's the amount of RAM. And that was about a $330 card when it was new. So obviously more expensive than these, but it could at least launch the title in 4K and do something, right? Again, this is a very specific cherry-picked test that's designed at this point now. Stalker 4K for us is more of a VRAM test than anything else. But we gotta talk about some value and such. So again, the card is $299 MSRP. What I wanna do real quick is I want to kind of do a quick search and see if we can even find an MSRP model. Now, the 5060 Prime is the only MSRP model as far as I could tell by perusing the websites when I was looking at the e-tailers and such. Yeah, so here we go. Okay, so looking at Micro Center's website right now, Tustin doesn't have any in stock, but on the shippable items, they show GPUs, which is weird because you can't buy GPUs as a shippable item. Anyway, I digress. The only $299 model that's shown is the 5060 Prime. Here's what's funny now. If we look at the other models that are in stock right now at Micro Center, the Zotac 5060 amp is $320. So we're already talking now a $20 premium, right? The NVIDIA 5060, the Gigabyte low profile is $340. This 5060 gaming overclock from MSI dual fan is $370. The 5060 Prime overclocked, this card but overclocked, $379. $80 premium for a few extra megahertz that are already baked into the BIOS. The MSI Gaming Trio, why the hell would there be a 5060 Gaming Trio? Anyway, I digress. That's a $380 card. The 5060 Tough from Asus, $410. And then for $10 more, you can get a Zotac 5060 Ti, which is significantly faster than a non-Ti. So this is the madness that we live in, that you can have a $299 card with a $110 premium tax put on top of it for something that is not going to actually get you any more real tangible performance. So the lower tiered cards like this, I never recommend going with like the crazy OC expensive models. It's like when Asus used to sell the 3060 Strix, which is a complete waste of money because it was like a $150 premium over the MSRP. And those dies are so power limited, you can't push them very far. So even the OC models, you're probably only getting like anywhere between 50 to maybe 75 additional megahertz at the most, which is not going to be noticeable. So this is why it's just so frustrating that the 5060 feels like such a, I can't even think of an analogy, it's just so frustrating. I mean, I'm grateful to Asus for sending me this card because no other AIBs or any other brands have really even tried. I don't think I honestly think that's NVIDIA putting their thumb on everyone saying, do not send these cards for review. And that's one of the reasons why it might have taken so long for us to get, simply because of the fact that it's almost like you had to wait for some of that heat to die down from all of the blacklisting discussion and stuff that was going on. But I can tell you that like Hardware Unboxed had to go through some like channels to be able to get access to a card. Steve at Gamers Nexus doesn't have a card. Paul's Hardware, as far as I could tell, didn't have a card. Linus doesn't have a review up of the card. I don't have a review up of the card. I don't see a Hardware Canucks review of the card up because the only reviews you saw online, which weren't even reviews, they were previews, which was cherry-picked